on this beautiful Wednesday here on the left coast of the United States. Power prices go negative in Germany. This was a story that was easy to miss. It was on Christmas Day. It was by Stanley Reed. And that was the headline in the New York Times. Power prices go negative in Germany. Now, what does that mean? That means that the power company comes to you, if you're a big user of power, a wholesale user of power, comes to you and says, we will pay you to take our electricity. Seriously, not making this up. We'll pay you, say, 60 or 80 euros for every megawatt that you take. Just take our electricity, please. We have too much of it. Now, how did Germany end up in this situation? They've got wind power and solar power. And they had a lot of wind that day. This is from the article by Stanley Reed. Power prices plunged below zero for much of Sunday and the early hours of Christmas Day on the EEP spot, a large European power trading exchange. Prices for electricity in Germany have dipped below zero, meaning customers are being paid to use power more than 100 times this year alone. Now, this was December 25th, so that would have been 2017. On Sunday, factory owners and other major consumers were at times paid more than 50 euros, or about $60 per megawatt hour, to take power. Several countries in Britain have experienced negative power prices, including Belgium, Britain, France, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. All of them rapidly, this is not in the article, my commentary here, all of them rapidly solarizing and wind powerizing, all of them moving to alternative energies. In one recent, back to the article, Germany's forays into negative pricing are the most frequent. In one recent example, power prices spent 31 hours below zero during the last week of October. This was in Germany. At one point, they dipped as low as minus 83 euros or minus $98. In other words, the power companies were paying customers $98 a megawatt to take electricity. In other words, anyone who was able to hook up for a large blast of electricity at the time was paid 83 euros per unit, $98 for the trouble. And then here's where it gets real interesting. They talk about RWE. This is one of Germany's largest operators of power installations, a big power company in Germany. They take advantage of negative prices by being paid to pump large volumes of water into a mountain lake in Austria. When the prices are higher for electricity, the company releases the water using turbines to generate electricity. So they store the electricity. Isn't that brilliant? Now, could we have that happen here? Well, we could. You'd have to get the petro-billionaires' stranglehold over American energy policy broken, but we could. Inside Climate News has an interesting story. Actually, it kind of goes back to back with this article in the Washington Post about the fact that there's basically they're calling this an explosive storm that's going to hit the northeastern United States, particularly the East Coast. In fact, most of the storm is going to be just a little bit offshore. And the pressure, atmospheric pressure, is predicted to fall so low that it will be equivalent to a hurricane. There will be high winds, and then after this happens, then this, polar vortex is coming in again from the North Pole. So what the hell is going on here? Why is it that our weather has gone completely nuts like this? Donald Trump says it proves that there's no such thing as global warming. In fact, it's the exact opposite of that. Global warming is causing the polar vortexes. There's a very simple explanation for all this. InsideClimateNews.org, the article is Ice Loss in the Polar Vortex, How a Warming Arctic Fuels Cold Snaps. And basically, here's how it works. There are in the northern hemisphere, there are two jet streams. The same thing in the southern hemisphere. There's the polar jet stream, which goes around the North Pole, and this is a river of high-speed, high-intensity air that flows around the North Pole. And then there's the tropical jet stream, one that flows just north of the equator, one by the Tropic of Cancer and one by the Tropic of Capricorn, the northern and southern hemispheres. And then, of course, there's a polar jet stream at the South Pole as well. So you've got these basically four jet streams. But the really consequential one for us in North America here is the Arctic jet stream, the polar jet stream, the one that goes around the North Pole. That river of rapidly flowing cold air is kept in place, is kept up there at the North Pole by what's called the temperature gradient, by the difference in temperature between the North Pole and the mid-latitudes. The larger that temperature difference, in other words, the colder it is at the North Pole and the warmer it is here, the larger the difference between the, North America essentially, or the Northern Hemisphere, and the North Pole. The bigger the difference, the stronger the jet stream is. Because, as we all know, weather, like cold fronts, warm fronts, when, cold air mass hits a warm air mass, what do you get? Thunderstorms, right? When you have a difference in temperature, the larger the difference in temperature, just like differences in pressure, with this storm, the larger the difference in temperature, the stronger the weather pattern. And we all grew up with this. This is, this is how you know when hurricanes are going to come, or thunderstorms, or tornadoes, or whatever it may be. So when the North Pole was colder, the jet stream was strong and stable. This is the world that I grew up in. Most of us grew up in for most of our lifetimes. For at least half of my lifetime, the jet stream was relatively stable. And so therefore, it kept the polar weather, the polar air, the North Pole air, in the North Pole. But now what's happened is, because the North Pole, because the Arctic regions, both north and south, the Arctic regions are warming at 500 or 600% faster a rate than the rest of the world. We saw, in some cases, a 34-degree digression from normal in the North Pole over the last 6 months. 34 degrees warmer than it should be. It was warmer in some cases along the at the 30th parallel, at the kind of the edge of the North Pole. It was warmer there in some cases than down here in the continental United States. And so when that happens, that temperature gradient, that temperature difference between the North Pole and the rest of the Northern Hemisphere diminishes. Right? The North Pole is warming faster than we are, so it's catching up with us in terms of temperature. So there's not that big temperature difference that produces the jet stream, or that keeps the jet stream in place. And the consequence of that is that the jet stream is starting to just kind of drool. It's getting wavy and lazy because it doesn't have the energy, it doesn't have the power to flow like a strong river. And now it's becoming like a weak creek, right? And so the jet stream just kind of drools down. It follows the Rocky Mountains all the way down to Texas, and then goes, follows the Atlantic Ocean back up to, Iceland, sort of thing. And it allows then all that polar air to drool down over the top of the United States and just hang out here for a week or two. And this is what's going on. Literally, the extreme cold that Donald Trump is complaining about in Washington, D.C., or in New York, or in Boston, or whatever it may be, that extreme cold is the product of global warming. It not only doesn't refute global warming, it proves global warming. It is the product of global warming. And it's going to get worse and worse year after year. Now, there will be some anomalies, because there are things that affect weather, El Niños and La Niñas and all that kind of stuff. There are things that affect this, and solar sunspots and whatnot. But the general trend is going to be for more of this severely cold weather here, and for more melting in the Arctic. And by the way, every time all that polar air comes down to these latitudes, it picks up the heat from our soil, from our pavements, from our cars, from our power plant. It picks up our heat, and from the sun, and takes that heat back to the North Pole, melting the ice even faster, thus, again, damaging the jet stream, which sets up the next violent storm down here in the lower 50s.